Most people hear the phrase a parallel version of you and imagine distance, another timeline, another life, somewhere else. But the truth is quieter and far more unsettling. The parallel version of you is not elsewhere. It is here operating alongside you as a different internal posture. One orientation is built around preservation, repeating what has worked before, justifying what no longer fits, maintaining coherence even when it costs aliveness. The other is organized around relevance, responding to what is necessary now, moving without excessive explanation, releasing what has lost meaning. The tension you may feel lately is not confusion or indecision. It is interference between these two orientations occupying the same psyche. You sense what needs to change, yet you can't fully articulate it. You already know, but you can't yet defend that knowing. That's because the message isn't arriving from the future. It's being transmitted from the version of you that has already stopped negotiating with what you are still tolerating. If this feels personal, it's because the message isn't informational. It's positional. It doesn't feel new. It feels overdue. From a Jungian perspective, this experience has nothing to do with mysticism and everything to do with how the psyche regulates itself. Jung understood the psyche as compensatory and self-correcting. When conscious identity no longer reflects the psyche's full direction, the unconscious does not argue or persuade, it reorganizes. A parallel orientation forms whenever consciousness lags behind psychic reality. One part of you continues to live by an identity that once worked. Another part has already moved on internally and is operating by a different logic. Jung observed that the unconscious does not confront the ego directly. It outgrows it. That outgrowing creates pressure, not symbols. The message is not a dream, a sign, or an omen. It is a felt inevitability, a quiet knowing that no longer needs justification. The ego wants continuity because continuity feels safe. The psyche wants correction because correction restores balance. And so the parallel version of you is not ahead of you in time. It is simply less burdened, no longer carrying explanations, defenses or delays that you are still trying to maintain. What follows is not guidance from elsewhere, but the content of what that orientation is already living by. The message, the parallel version of you is already living by concern's identity, and it is simpler than it feels. You are no longer who this life arrangement was built for. That version of you has stopped asking who it is supposed to be in this situation because it no longer uses identity as a prerequisite for movement. Action has already separated from self-description, where the familiar orientation still consults roles, narratives, values, and personal history before deciding what is allowed. The parallel orientation moves according to necessity and lets identity reorganize afterward. From a Jungian perspective, this is not rebellion but reallocation. Ego identity is functional, not permanent. It exists to maintain balance between inner life and outer demand. When it can no longer perform that function, the psyche does not destroy it. It withdraws energy from it. The structure remains recognizable, even socially intact, but it becomes hollow. Decisions feel heavier when filtered through it. Motivation weakens. Conviction sins. The ego experiences this hollowing as danger because it interprets loss of authority as loss of survival. The shadow meanwhile clings to familiarity over accuracy, preferring a known misfit to an unknown correction. This is why the message feels uncomfortable rather than dramatic. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing is wrong. The allegiance is simply shifting. The parallel version of you has already released the need to defend an identity that no longer governs behavior. It no longer asks permission from a self-concept that has stopped producing coherence. This does not mean the old identity was false. It means it was temporary. You are not failing at being yourself. You are succeeding at outgrowing a configuration that once made sense. The discomfort you feel is not loss but lag. The sensation of consciousness arriving late to a change the psyche has already implemented. The message is not asking you to abandon who you were. It is asking you to stop protecting what has already finished its work. When loyalty shifts inward, continuity survives without rigidity, allowing adaptation to replace preservation as the quiet measure of psychological integrity over time gently unfolding. And this is where the message deepens, because the parallel version of you did not eliminate fear to move forward. It simply changed the relationship. Fear still appears as sensation, as image, as cautionary whisper, but it no longer holds the authority to organize life. The older configuration waits for certainty, for confidence, for the quieting of anxiety before acting. The parallel self understands that waiting is itself a decision made on fear's behalf. It moves while fear remains present, but peripheral, no longer seated at the center of choice. In Jungian terms, fear persists only while it is fed psychic energy. When libido is withdrawn from outdated protective strategies, fear does not vanish. It loses structural power. The psyche stops reinforcing the alarm. What remains is information, not command. The ego resists this shift because it equates fearlessness with danger and control with safety. The shadow amplifies warnings, insisting that acting without reassurance is reckless, immoral, or naive. Yet, this resistance reveals the truth. Fear was never a safeguard. It was a governing principle. The parallel version of you has already discovered that fear's volume was proportional to the attention it received. By no longer negotiating with it, fear becomes background noise rather than a rulebook. This does not produce recklessness. It produces precision. Action becomes quieter, cleaner, less dramatic. You do not feel brave. You feel available. You stop asking whether you are ready and begin noticing whether the moment is alive. Fear still signals edges, but it no longer defines borders. The psyche reclaims energy once used for avoidance and redirects it toward engagement. What once felt like anxiety now feels like momentum without narrative. This is why the change feels unsettling to the old self. There is no emotional victory speech, no disappearance of discomfort. There is simply movement without permission. The message is not that you are becoming fearless. It is that fear no longer governs access to your future. Courage here is not resistance. It is irrelevance. Fear speaks, but it no longer decides. This shift rewrites destiny through action, not explanation, not delay. The parallel version of you experiences the world differently. Not because reality itself has changed, but because the internal filters that once dictated interaction have shifted. What used to feel like obstacles, friction, or resistance now registers with a quieter intensity. Situations that previously provoked negotiation, justification, or struggle are met with action first and evaluation second. Conversations unfold more smoothly. Deadlines arrive without panic, and environmental friction no longer mirrors internal indecision. This is not coincidence, luck, or external favor. It is the byproduct of alignment. In Jungian terms, the outer life functions as a reflection of inner authority. When ego leadership no longer monopolizes attention and choice, reality ceases to enforce old habits. Confirmation is withdrawn, not imposed. The shadow amplifies the tendency to interpret these shifts incorrectly. You blame timing, other people, or external circumstances instead of recognizing that the source of resistance was within. The ego insists that perseverance or effort must restore order, failing to notice that the struggle itself was unnecessary once alignment occurred. The message the parallel version conveys is subtle but precise. Reality does not need to be conquered. It only ceases to resist what the psyche has already authorized. What once demanded explanation now flows without commentary. Action is no longer pre-negotiated by fear, attachment, or rigid identity. The friction that remains is formational, not directive. It signals edges without commanding retreat. By observing this, you begin to discern the internal origin of struggle. It is not life conspiring but your orientation lagging behind psychic reality. The external world confirms what has already shifted within. You are not being favored by circumstance. You are simply moving in accordance with the part of yourself that has already stopped arguing with what is inevitable. Alignment, not effort, is what reduces resistance. The parallel self demonstrates that the path is not cleared externally first. It is cleared internally, and the world quietly follows. The parallel version of you is already moving while the old self hesitates, still negotiating outcomes and seeking certainty. It does not deliberate, justify or rehearse what must happen. Action occurs without fanfare because the psyche has already determined the direction. Consciousness merely catches up afterward. There is no exhilaration, no urgency, only a quiet settling into what is necessary. The old version interprets this stillness as inaction or indecision, failing to recognize that what once required negotiation no longer does. In Jungian terms, the psyche does not broadcast its plans. It enacts them subtly, stabilizing transitions emotionally before the conscious mind grasps them. This withdrawal of internal debate creates a sense of inevitability, a knowing that precedes explanation.
Desadou amplifies discomfort.
The ego panics at the absence of deliberation, fearing loss of control, while the shadow resists the lack of familiar scaffolding, anxious that authority or identity may vanish. Yet this is not transformation into someone unrecognizable. It is the old identity ceasing to interfere with the movement that is already in motion. The parallel self embodies what has been decided at a structural level. The continuation of psychic alignment without internal sabotage. The viewer may sense this as calm or neutrality, not excitement, because the energy that formerly fueled hesitation or internal debate is no longer necessary.
De mensaje y simple.
The choice has already been made. What is happening is not sudden change, nor is it contingent on effort, proof, or external validation. It is the psyche enacting what has been resolved beneath awareness. And the parallel version shows that inevitability is experienced internally before it appears externally. The shift is quiet, settled, and unarguable. What is underway cannot be undone, only observed and integrated. Notice where hesitation has ceased without effort, where the old need to justify or control feels redundant. Observe how action arises before deliberation, how decisions unfold with ease because the internal friction that once demanded explanation has been withdrawn. There is no instruction here, only the removal of objection, a clearing of internal debate that makes space for what is already determined. The parallel version is not offering guidance. It has stopped negotiating with what the ego once insisted upon. Watch how routines, choices, and attention shift naturally when resistance is absent. This is not a performance to imitate. It is a posture to inhabit. Calmly attending to where the psyche has already aligned allows the message to register somatically, not as a concept, but as an internal knowing. What feels like emergence is actually integration. The internal authority has moved, and the old self is no longer required to consent. The parallel version of you is not speaking. It is ceasing to argue. What seems like a message is simply the absence of the resistance that previously structured life. You are not being directed towards something new nor being given advice. The work is already underway beneath awareness. This quiet withdrawal creates inevitability. Action proceeds because psychic alignment has already occurred. The tension you sense is not a signal but the space left where negotiation once existed. It is your responsibility only to witness, integrate, and allow what has been decided internally to manifest externally. This is echoes of psyche, where the movements you haven't explained yet quietly determine the life you are already stepping into.